Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have an outstanding guest with us today in studio. He is one of the most awarded copywriters and creative directors in the business today. David Baldwin is the founder of Baldwin and. David served as the chairman of the One Club in New York City, the force behind the One Show. Alongside his creative advertising exploits, David is an executive producer on the film Art and Copy, which just premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. And he's also a guitarist-songwriter for the band Pants, whose CD, Twice the Snake You Need, can be found on iTunes and Amazon.com. Thank you very much for joining us in studio
Thanks
today.
for having me. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the first thing that I'd like to talk about is the new company. You've got baldwinand.com, which is up and running in Durham. So tell us a little bit about Baldwin and what is its purpose?
Sure. Well, we are an advertising agency, and I like to call it a creative practice. We are very interested in creating ideas and things for companies. The mission of the company is actually to create great provocative things that have an effect in the world. So it's not always advertising. We're doing a whole lot of different kinds of things.
Who are some of your clients at Baldwin and?
Well, right now we are our biggest client is Nortel, and we have been helping them through their post-bankruptcy messaging, things like that. My experience tends to be on kind of big mass brands. I've worked on my previous 10 years before I opened Baldwin and. I was at an agency called McKinney in Durham, North Carolina. Was a partner and creative director there. Worked on Travelocity. Worked on Audi. Was part of the very big automotive turnaround with Audi for 10 years. Polaris, Sony, brands like that. So,
who do you see as your audience, and how do you, as the creative director of the company, how do you reach that audience? What are some of the things that you do?
Well, we like to think of ourselves as a national company that lives in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And we tend to kind of look for clients who have big challenges, who need to think those challenges through, and we're currently Baldwin and is a little bit more interested in projects right now. We'd love to be the agency of record for big clients, but I think probably our next year is going to be more on a project basis where we can actually go in and really help kind of solve tough problems.
Well, let's for our viewers, let's kind of talk through the timeline of a typical project.
Sure.
You get a client, it could be a major company or perhaps a smaller, more local company. Take us through the timeline for a typical project at Baldwin and.
Sure. What typically happens is clients don't always have the time and the resources to think things through 6 months to a year out. So often what happens is they come in with an issue that's very immediate and needs a creative solution. It's something that can get out into the marketplace pretty fast. So we find ourselves with anywhere from 3 weeks to get back with a solution to literally half a day. You know, sometimes they'll call and say, we need something before lunch. And there's a tremendous amount of fire that comes with that because it's a lot of fun. And for any creative person, I think a deadline is actually a real positive, positive thing. Because sometimes we will, you know, if you don't have a deadline, you'll tend to take the time you need.
Right, and be a little bit more, you know, put a lot more time and I guess deliberation into it, but under pressure, you know, sometimes the best kind of work comes from that, I think.
Yeah, I think the difference between advertising and fine art is that advertising is art, but it's art serving commerce. And because of that, you get very, very quick at coming up with creative solutions fast. And it's really part of the job is that you have to be fast with your solutions and you're trying to solve problems and you have to think on your feet and you have to move very, very quickly. And time is a luxury in our business quite often. I
definitely want to get to talking about the convergence of art and advertising. I think it's fascinating, and you know what one person considers art, another person might not. So I think it's fertile ground for talking about, and it really relates to art and copy, I think. But before we get to that just yet, how did you assemble your team at Baldwin and?
Well, it's funny. You tend to, again, as a creative director, you tend to attract like-minded people over your career. I've been in the business for 25 years. I've worked in New York, I've worked in San Francisco, I've worked in Portland, Oregon. Everybody that's working with me now, with one exception, is from my previous experience, most of them from McKinney. And they're people that over the years have either left McKinney or, but stayed in constant contact with. And it's almost, it's funny because I am in a band as well. It's almost like being in a band. You have people that you create well with, and really what you're trying to do when you're creating a company is create culture. And that culture is, and an advertising agency is a bit of a collective. It's an art collective in a way, but it's an art for commerce collective. And I'm a big believer that a company is people, not a building. And so the people that we have and that I've worked with are people that I trust. They're people that trust me. And we know that it's about making ideas better. And we can say anything to each other, and nobody ever gets their feelings hurt when you say, that's a terrible idea. And people tell me that all the time at the office. That's awful, we're not doing it. But we're always about getting to a better solution and something that's going to work in the marketplace. So.
Well, it seems like the creative vision for the company is really essential to kind of having people coalesce around that vision. I wonder what thoughts you have on the, the things that contribute to a really good team.
Well, I will say this. I think your point is exactly correct. The vision and mission of a company is critical. And just like we deal with brands all the time that actually don't know why they're in business. The people that work there don't really understand why the brand exists. And an agency is a brand unto itself. And so we're very much driven by our mission. And our mission is, like I said, to create great provocative things that have an effect in the world. Some agencies are more about we want to make money. We as an agency want to make money. Sure. And you get into they would never say that, but you get into the actual hallways in the building, and what is there is we need to make money. We are much more driven by the product that we create. We want to create really great work. We want to create things that touch people, that touch their hearts, that people like, And it's a fundamental, I think, difference in attitudes about advertising is that some people are in the industry purely to sell at any cost. It's about we need to sell this product at any cost. And we would say, we want to sell, but we also don't want to leave bodies laying around that. We want people to actually like you. We want people to like you as a brand and to want to buy you. And we would, create a conversation between the brand and the consumer where they feel like they're a part of it and they're getting something out of it. And it's not just this, hey, we got to sell. And so, that clients hear that, and a client often doesn't care. They want to sell. We do too. But of course, we think there's actually a bigger mission involved.
So you almost have to have two different personalities to think.
Muhammad Ali, St. Sebastian, he came out in his trunks, etc. And I said, Muhammad, I want you to pose just like this. I want to kind of
think about the world in a different way. And then the other hat you have to wear is, but it has to meet a bottom line. We do have to meet our budget.
That is absolutely the challenge of the business. That is it in a nutshell, is that I have a very good friend of mine named Ernie Schenck who wrote a book called The Houdini Solution. And his whole premise is that you have to actually think inside the box. The most creative solutions come from inside the box, and that the constraints that are placed on you in advertising actually force you to be more creative because you have to get out of them. You have to work around no budget. You have to work around no time. You have to work around products that don't make sense necessarily for everybody, but they make a lot of sense for a niche, and you have to figure out how that works. So I think that is the art meets commerce part. Otherwise, you're just doing whatever you think is neat or whatever you think is cool or something that's funny, and that's not that's not the game. The game is just to do that, because then you're not actually going to meet the objectives.
What do you enjoy most about advertising in the job? What do you?
I love the problem solving. You're literally handed a new challenge every day. Somebody comes in and says, this is what I need to happen, and it's not happening. What can we do? Or in the automotive industry, showroom traffic's down 50%. What can we do? And then and that's a tough one, and you really got to sit down and go, well, let's think about that. And we're dealing with that right now with a client that I can't talk about, but sure. But showroom traffic's down 50%, and so that's fun. It's also it's a lot of pressure, but it's kind of a good pressure. It's kind of a fun pressure. It's exciting.
Well, let's transition to the film art and copy, because that sort of it's really the platform that really discusses a lot of this. The film, for folks who are watching at home, is Art and Copy, which premiered at Sundance and then was picked up for distribution actually at the Sundance Film Festival. Let's go ahead and roll the clip of the first clip that we have, and then we'll chat about it afterwards.
Muhammad Ali, St. Sebastian. He came out in his trunks, etc., and I said, Muhammad, I want you to pose just like this. I want it kind of relaxed. I want it the same way, but your head is in agony. I hated the system. I hated the status quo. We were changing the world, and everybody respected it. They really understood you were changing the culture. I would make political and graphic statements that grabs at the heart, grabs at your throat, and make statements about what the hell you think life should be about. You know, and that's what I've done, I think, all my life with my advertising. I mean, I was always trying to sell product, but I was always making a point.
Well, there you have it. You've been watching a little bit of Art and Copy, which is a film on the history of advertising, particularly in the last 50 years or so. And we have in studio the executive producer of the film, one of the executive producers of the film, Art and Copy, David Baldwin, with us. So let's talk a little bit about Art and Copy. Who were Doyle, Dane, and Bernbach, and what effect did they have on the creative revolution of the ad industry?
They were the seminal advertising agency that changed everything. If you think about advertising pre-Doyle, Dane, Bernbach, it was that kind of sell the American dream in a way where bigger cars, faster this, faster that, you know, everything was kind of copy-driven, and it was selling things that weren't necessarily true. And along came this company called Doyle, Dane, Bernbach, and they said, let's work differently, and let's make it about creating amazing ideas that touch people. And probably the most famous campaign that they did, that at least started the whole thing off, was a campaign for Volkswagen. There's a very famous ad called Think Small, and all it was a little Beetle and the words Think Small and a little piece of body copy and a logo. It was unheard of at the time. Nobody had ever done anything like that before, and it seems kind of quaint now. It's so simple.
What was their vision? Was their creative vision a direct, response to the state that the advertising industry was in? Do you think?
It absolutely was, and I think the Bill Bernbach in particular was a bit of a philosopher as much as an advertising person, and he had worked with Paul Rand, who was one of the great designers of the 20th century, and Paul Rand is a big part of this as well, even though he didn't work there. But Bill Bernbach said, let's stop working the way we used to work, where copywriters write, art directors on a different floor, and they just hand ideas off, and let's put them together, hence Art and Copy, and the art director and the copywriter will figure that out. And it brought a real humanity to it, and it changed the entire focus of what advertising had to be. And it sparked probably most of the great agencies of the creative revolution in the 60s. Pretty much all came out of Doyle, Dane, Bernbach. George Lois, who we just saw in that clip, came out of Doyle, Dane, Bernbach. He's one of the great art directors in the history of the industry.
And of course, one of the folks that I'm sure people in our viewing audience have heard of is Andy Warhol, and his art seemed to be a response to that sort of mass-produced, like you said, not necessarily true idea of what a product was. It seemed to be a response to that. How does his work, Lichtenstein's work, fit into that entire movement of the 60s and 70s?
Well, it's a great question, because I think what happened as a result of what Doyle, Dane, Bernbach did is that the Warhols and the Lichtensteins and all of these amazing artists, these pop artists, it created a two-way dialogue between pop culture and advertising. Whereas before that, advertising wasn't part of pop culture. It was this thing that was out there that was seen as a little bit manipulative and sold sort of this American dream that didn't feel true. And instead what happened is Doyle Dane brought it into pop culture to where people actually became part of people's lives in a way that now we see. To this day, people will talk about, oh, I hate advertising, I hate advertising. Oh, you know what commercial I love? I love that spot with the lizards from Budweiser. Remember that? Oh, great. The truth is, people hate advertising because it's 90% of it's horrible. But there's 5 or 10% that's fantastic, that people love, and people want to bring it into them, and they own it, and that's what Doyle, Dane, Bernbach was.
I wonder how much of this actually had to do with the rise of the television as well. Certainly that was a major change in American culture from the 50s into the 60s as well.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And it was, advertising had this mass voice now to speak, and I think you had this small handful of people that took saw that as a responsibility, and I think Bill Bernbach in particular, saw it as a responsibility to speak a certain way and to take responsibility and accountability for the kinds of messages that he was putting out.
Very cool. Well, the guest is David Baldwin. He is the creative director of BaldwinAnd.com, based in Durham, North Carolina. I think we're going to roll one more clip from the film Art and Copy, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival recently and has been picked up for distribution. So let's roll clip 2.
And I think that the problems that my parents had, my father not being around there, I think emotion was always to some degree a part of my life that had been left out. And I think, I mean, I'm not a shrink and I haven't been to one much, but I suspect that I let advertising be a sort of an avenue to express some of the things that I might not have experienced in my life. I missed a lot of things, and I certainly missed, you know, the kind of wonderful families that we all still admire. And I think there's a lot of that in my work.
When Americans buy a Hal Riney experience, when they buy into one of his campaigns, I think many times what they're buying is what they wish their lives would be.
There you have it. You're watching The Artist's Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran. We have David Baldwin with us, who is the creative director of BaldwinAnd.com, as well as the executive producer of Art and Copy, which we've just been watching a clip of. So how did you first become involved with the movie?
Well, I'm the chairman of an organization in New York called the One Club, and I'm in my final time as chairman, and there's a new chairman coming up. But the One Club's mission is to celebrate advertising and design in all its forms, and to we like to call it, we're the keeper of the flame for great creative in the industry, and we want people to know that great creative is great for business. And so we said, let's make a film. We want to live our mission. Again, it's about living the mission, not talking about the mission. And so we said, let's make a film that celebrates what we believe in. And so we made this film, Art and Copy. And you know, the film, one of the things that I think is interesting about this film is it's about this art form that exists that people don't see as an art form. And I understand why they don't see it as an art form, because most of the work, again, like I said, most advertising is sort of seen as annoying, and it is. But you have this handful of people and companies doing this amazing work that will be seen when people look back in 100 years as one of the most prolific art forms of this century. But the artists themselves are completely anonymous to most people. And so we wanted people to realize that there is humanity and there are souls behind this work. And so there's Mary Wells and Hal Riney and Dan Wyden and Jeff Goodby and Rich Silverstein and David Kennedy, these amazing people who've created this work. And massive cultural movements have been created by Nike, for instance, and that's in the film.
I wonder how much of it is that the institutions, academic institutions, really need to embrace the ideas that, you know, basically advertising is changing our culture, and it has. And what role do you see universities and scholars and scholarship in making these folks who are largely unknown to the American masses and yet are part of our daily lives every time we turn on a TV at home?
Yeah.
What role does the university play?
Very, very important, and a very, very good point. The One Club in particular is very involved in education, and one of the reasons is that very point. We want people to understand, clients to understand, creative people, account people getting into the business, the MBAs of the world, who are, a lot of them are about the results, not about the creative part of it. To understand that there is an accountability there that you have to people when you're creating a relationship between your brand and people. We want everybody to understand that there's this accountability and responsibility to actually add to the culture, and it has to start at the student level. It has to, because we can do all we can to try to present and produce great work, but the clients are ultimately the ones that are in charge. They're the ones that are going to approve it, and they're the ones with the money. And so it's very, very important to get to them early.
Is there a way for an advertiser to develop his or her own voice the same way that filmmakers have done in, say, the past 30 or 40 years? Whereas if you look sort of historically at film at the same time, back in the 30s and 40s, people didn't really watch a film because necessarily of the director.
Right.
And yet now folks know, well, if Spielberg's coming out with a new film, it's going to be great. And is there a way for advertisers to develop their own iconic and idiosyncratic voice?
It's it's an interesting phenomenon because we are, as advertising people, we are supposed to stand in the back, and we do. And I think that's right. I actually do think that that's right that we do, because it's not about us, it is about the work. That said, there was a time in the United States where people did know they knew a little bit about who did the work. And there are countries around the world, in France for instance, advertising people are celebrities. They're celebrities just like movie stars.
Sure.
And so I think that it's right that we stand back, but I do think that if people did know who we were, it would make more people more accountable to the work, because you would have to be able to look people in the eye and say, I did that. And you know, we don't always hit it out of the park where we do something that we think adds to the culture. I don't want to pretend that we do. And even the people in the film who've done all this amazing work, you know, they didn't get it right every time. It's not always easy to do. So, and I know that I certainly have given as well as I've gotten. So,
well, I'd love to talk about that, you know, framework that you have to build for, you know, saying, okay, I want to create something. I want it to be, you know, my creative vision, but at the same time, you have to, I guess you have to sort of serve the purpose of the advertisement and, you know, the company's vision as well. But let's roll clip number 3. I think we have that queued up here from the film Art and Copy. You're watching The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have David Baldwin with us, who is the executive producer of Art and Copy. Let's roll it.
Most advertising is pretty offensive, intrusive, aggravating, annoying, and intellectually based at the lowest common denominator. So it's a hard business to remain prideful, but I happen to believe that when advertising is done well, the wall or the billboard that celebrates a brand artfully and beautifully can be part of our culture as opposed to some form of pollution.
So there you have it. Those are a couple of clips from the Art and Copy, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. We have in studio today David Baldwin, who is an executive producer on the film. So you mentioned before at One Club, we talked a little bit about it. Let's get in depth a little bit more. How did One Club, you know, what was One Club's role in the development of this film? Were most of the people involved in the project, you know, members of One Club?
Yeah, basically everybody was sympathetic to the One Club, certainly. And what we did was we came up with this notion of we wanted to create a film. When you're the One Club and your entire standard is about great creative, you don't make a crummy film. You try to make a great film. Whether we did or not, I'll have to leave to viewers and everything. But we really wanted to make a film that was socially relevant and a great film. So we had to try to figure out how to get it made. And so we ended up financing it ourselves. And we took it around to all of the big networks, advertising networks. There, you know, every agency is basically there are 4 networks in the world, 5 networks in the world that own everybody, and then the independents. And we couldn't get them to pay for it, and it was very interesting. It was a very interesting phenomenon to try to get them to sponsor, and all kinds of reasons for that. So we ended up doing it ourselves, and it became a real labor of love. And the director that we hired is a guy named Doug Prey, who did Surfwise last year, and a movie called Hype, another movie called Scratch. Really fantastic documentarian. And he really is the one who shaped it, and we wanted him to make the movie he wanted to make. So we were very open to it being very critical to advertising. It ended up, he felt it would be more subversive to actually talk about the people trying to do good work than to go ahead and trash advertising, because everybody knows the bad part of advertising. We know that. We all know that intuitively, that most advertising is a little destructive and not so good. And so he's known for making subversive films. And he said that he thinks this might be his most subversive film ever, because it's actually presenting a side of advertising that's the good part of it and the art part of it. So,
what was the experience like at Sundance?
It was amazing. You know, I was on the board of the Full Frame Festival here for 5 or 6 years, and we did all of the marketing at McKinney, at my previous agency for Full Frame, and I have a great love and respect for that festival. And Sundance was so big and so overwhelming, and the social and sort of pop cultural relevance that comes along with getting into Sundance, and then we were one of the buzz films at Sundance, and then we ended up getting picked up at Sundance. We were the only documentary that got picked up during the actual festival. Is amazing, and it was an amazing experience. It also made me long for Full Frame a little bit. I then, you know, 2 months later went to the festival here at Full Frame and had the time of my life. And the movie actually showed at Full Frame, which was a real sort of dream come true for me. And I loved the intimacy of that festival. But Sundance was what a baseball player would call going to the show. You know, it was like going to the Super Bowl. It was pretty big, yeah, pretty amazing.
So how did you find out that it had been picked up for distribution? Do you remember the exact conversation?
It got picked up at like 11:45 on Sunday night, the last day of the festival, and I was not there. I actually had to go back because I had to get back to work because I have a startup, and I was there for about 4 days, and was there for the premieres, and we had all the people that were in the movie that are still alive. They were there, and so I ended up leaving and missing out on those conversations. So, but got an email that night, of course, from one of my producer partners, and it said, you know, we're in. We got signed.
That's got to be exciting, I would imagine.
And Art House Films picked it up, and really innovative, very cool company picked it up. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming down to our last minute here, or minute and a half on the show. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects. You mentioned McKinney and your work there. Of course, you have your own independent agency now, baldwinand.com. What projects are you most proud of, looking back now? Of course, there's art and copy of the film, but what projects at McKinney are you most proud of?
Well, I think probably the most well-known thing that I was part of there was the Roaming Gnome for Travelocity, which
we've all seen.
Amazing things for their business. But also did a campaign for Audi called Art of the Heist, where we did one of the first ARGs. It was a game where we stole a campaign where we actually stole an A3 out of the showroom and did this entire interactive integrated campaign around it. We also did a campaign for Polaris that I loved, where we got the CEO of Polaris to challenge all the other CEOs of the other ATV companies to a fight, to a duel, and that was a lot of fun. It's on our website.
We'll have to check it out. The website is baldwinand.com. Our guest in studio today is David Baldwin. He is the creative director of the company. Thank you very much for joining us in studio today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Very cool. Well, for all of us here at the Raleigh Television Network, Michael and Marnie working hard back there in the control room, I want to thank you for tuning in. Thanks so much. And that's a wrap.
So now it's all, mics are off.
Pretty much.